In our last session, we continued to ask the question of could Jesus come back at any time if there were signs that needed to precede his second coming. And we looked at the claim that Jesus made that before he returned, there would be some sort of global cataclysmic event where it would almost be like the earth was being rolled up, the earth was being finished. And not to scare us and not to make us feel afraid, we're encouraged to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus and to trust him through that. And Jesus and the writers of the New Testament, they all encourage us to stay true and faithful. But let's just unpack this sign a little bit further and see if we can learn anything more that the Bible wants to help us understand. Jesus described these incredible signs of the sky turning dark and all the sort of the heavens disappearing. Remember that John had the privilege of having this vision of Revelation and this vision of the end of times. And as we look at this sort of John playing this videotape, this film of the end times and trying to write it down and describe what he was seeing, in chapter 6, we see him describing the time where Jesus, he breaks the seal, one of these old-fashioned seals that seals up a document. And as Jesus breaks this seal, the sixth seal, John writes, "There was a great earthquake. The sun became as dark as black cloth, and the moon became as red as blood. Then the stars of the sky fell to the earth like green figs falling from a tree shaken by a strong wind. The sky was rolled up like a scroll, and all of the mountains and islands were moved from their places. Then everyone, the kings of the earth, the rulers, the generals, the wealthy, the powerful, and every slave and free person, all hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks in the mountains. And they cried to the mountains and the rocks, 'Fall on us and hide us from the face of the one who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to survive?'" Quite powerful words that John's writing. And remember, he's writing down what he's seeing. He's seeing this scene play out before him, and he's then trying to describe it to us. What do we make of that? If we're completely honest, it is a bit difficult to really know what this imagery is describing, but we can hazard a little bit of a guess. What we're seeing is something that's not happening in secret, but is happening publicly and globally, cataclysmically. It's not something in hiding. And what we're having described to us, it suggests there's some sort of severe gravitational disturbance of the solar system. There might be volcanic eruptions that are causing the sky to turn dark, the moon to turn red. We can't quite be sure. But a Russian scientist called Immanuel Velikovsky, he compiled this non-religious collection of signs that, to be quite honest, science couldn't explain. And he went through these periods of history and researched them and identified a series of events that science couldn't explain but couldn't dismiss. He looked at volcanic eruptions, seismic activity, solar disturbances, and documented them all. And although there's some debate over some of the work, what it does go to show is that it is possible for some of these events to actually generate some of the things that we're reading about in Revelation, some of the things that Jesus was describing, some of the things that the writers of the New Testament were describing. But what we clearly get a sense of is that there is a clear difference between what Jesus would call birth pains and what we're reading in Revelation. At the beginning of Matthew 24, when Jesus is beginning to describe these signs to his disciples, he says a number of things. You will hear of wars and threats of wars, but don't panic. Yes, these things must take place, but the end won't happen immediately. Nation will go to war against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in many parts of the world. But all this is only the first of the birth pains with more to come. What we see in around us in the world today is we see some of these things happening. But Jesus would have us remember that these would be birth pains. They're not the events that we see described in the New Testament, but they are signs to point us towards the second coming. They are signs to indicate what follows and to help to prepare us to get our lives ready. And that essentially is the message of this passage. It's quite clear that the events that are described, that Jesus describes in Matthew 24 and we see John describing in Revelation, are events on a global scale that could happen rapidly. They could happen in a matter of minutes. So it is quite possible that those signs could happen at any time, and that would then begin Jesus' return. So to come back to our question of signs and being ready, we need to make sure that our hearts are ready, our hearts are right with God, and that we're learning to trust Him in a time of peace, so that should we find ourselves in this moment where these cataclysmic events are happening, we're able to understand what's happening and trust God to bring us through those. Can I encourage you? Take this opportunity to make sure your walk and your life with God is right.